Do you need sleep? You should. Without it, you won't survive very long. If you miss a day, you might feel grumpy or find it hard to focus. But it can get worse than that. It can make you go insane. In 1963, a high school student named Randy Gardner pulled off something insane. He stayed awake for 11 straight days. That's 264 hours, no sleep. Now, Randy did this willingly. But why? Well, at first it was a science project. But by day 3 he was hallucinating. By day 5, he couldn't remember his name. He thought he was a football player. He stared at the clocks that weren't there. He talked to people who didn't exist. And by the end, he couldn't form full sentences. And the scariest part is, doctors still don't fully understand what long-term sleep deprivation does to the brain. Some believe it may cause permanent damage. Others think it unlocks parts of your mind we were never meant to touch. Randy survived, but he later said he'd never do it again. And honestly, neither should you. Sleep is crucial to human survival. We spend about 1/3 of our lives asleep, and for good reason. While we're catching our Z's, our bodies are busy repairing themselves from the wear and tear of the day. We're literally molding ourselves back into peak condition every night. But how much sleep do we need? Well, most of us need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. But everyone's different. Some people can function well on 6 hours, while others need 10. But whatever your number is, you have to reach it. Otherwise, you won't be operating at full capacity. When you don't sleep, your brain doesn't shut down. But it's not quite all there either. This can make it harder to concentrate and pay attention to what's going on around you. After all, sleep helps us process everything we experience during the day. Without it, we're basically running on half cylinders. And after 2 days without sleep, you'll really feel it. It'll start to affect your mood. Sleep deprivation causes stress hormones to destabilize your emotions, making you more irritable and impulsive. In other words, you're going to be a lot more prone to lashing out or losing control. Not exactly what you want after a long day, right? But it gets worse than that. When you go 3 days without sleep, things can start to get weird. At this point, you've probably heard of hallucinations. These are basically when your brain tricks you into seeing things that aren't really there. For example, some people see ghostly figures or hear voices that only they can hear. But you might be thinking these are common in horror movies, not real life. Well, think again. Hallucinations are actually pretty common in people who haven't slept in 3 days. Sometimes they can even be more intense. They can cause you to hear sounds so loud they hurt your ears, or see flashing lights that make you feel sick. That's because sleep deprivation affects your senses. It makes them feel heightened, almost like you're on drugs. But unfortunately, it also means you might see things that aren't really there. And if you thought that was scary, things are about to get much worse. Going 4 days without sleep will completely mess with your memory. At this point, you'll be experiencing something called sleep deprivation amnesia. Basically, your brain will forget things that happened while you were awake. So if someone asks you what you did yesterday, you might be totally confused. You won't be able to remember. This is because sleep helps us consolidate our memories. Without it, we can't remember anything. And it's not just conversations you'll forget. It's everything. The faces of friends and family might become a blur to you. You might not even recognize yourself in the mirror. That's how powerful sleep is. Without it, we can't think clearly or remember what's happening around us. But some people do it anyway, usually because they have to. Take, for instance, doctors and nurses working the night shift. They often have to go without sleep for days on end. And while they might be experts at what they do, that doesn't mean they're immune to sleep deprivation. In fact, studies show that healthcare workers who work night shifts are at risk of developing serious health conditions. What are those conditions, you ask? Well, some researchers claim working nights could lead to heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and even cancer. But it's not just healthcare workers. People in the military sometimes have to stay awake for days to keep watch. Parents with newborns or anyone caring for a sick loved one might have to stay awake too. But let's say none of those scenarios apply to you. Maybe you're wondering if you could ever voluntarily go without sleep. Well, yes, it is possible, but it's not recommended. We know that because it's been studied extensively. Scientists love messing with people's sleep. One famous experiment was conducted in 1963. A high school student named Randy Gardner wanted to raise money for his school science fair, so he came up with an experiment. How long could he stay awake? On April 1963, Randy decided to pull an all-nighter. At first, he was excited, almost like it was a party. But by the next day, he was starting to feel tired. He took a nap, but it didn't help. By day 3, he was desperate. He tried drinking coffee, taking cold showers, even sticking needles in his eyes. But nothing helped. And that's when the hallucinations started. Randy saw ghostly figures wandering around his house. He started talking to imaginary friends. By day 5, he had completely lost it. He couldn't even remember his name. He thought he was a football player. Luckily, his parents intervened and forced him to go to the hospital. The doctors were amazed. They kept Randy under observation for several months, but he never got his old self back. Even today, scientists aren't sure what happened to him. Some believe that sleep deprivation unlocked parts of his mind that we weren't meant to touch. Others think it caused permanent damage. You might be wondering if you're immune to all this. After all, you're a modern person. You eat healthy foods, maybe even exercise every day. But the truth is, sleep deprivation affects us all the same. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, young, or old. It'll mess with your mind in the same ways. And that raises the question, what's the worst that can happen? Well, if you manage to survive without sleep for more than a week, you might not be the same ever again. Studies show that long-term sleep deprivation can cause lasting effects on your mental and physical health. You might have trouble thinking clearly or remembering things. Your vision might suffer, and you might feel exhausted all the time. But there's also something called post-sleep deprivation psychosis. Basically, after you finally get some sleep, you might experience severe mental problems. Again, this is extremely rare, but it goes to show how dangerous sleep deprivation can be. So far, the longest anyone has gone without sleeping and lived to tell the tale is 11 days. That's 264 hours. But even after Randy got his much-needed rest, he wasn't the same. He continued to experience terrifying hallucinations for weeks. He was haunted by nightmares. He couldn't think clearly and he couldn't work properly. All because he stayed awake for more than a week. Some of you might be thinking, this can't happen to me. But the truth is, you could end up in a situation where you're forced to stay awake for several days. That's why it's important to know the risks. That way, you can protect yourself. First of all, you should never try to stay awake for longer than a few days, unless you have to. Sure, it might seem like a fun challenge, but it's not worth the risk. Second, if you do find yourself struggling to stay awake, you should take breaks. Try to lie down for even just a few minutes. It'll help you clear your head and give you the energy to keep going. Finally, make sure you get plenty of rest afterwards. Don't try to catch up on sleep by sleeping for 10 or 12 hours. Just go to bed at your normal time and relax. Give your body the chance to recover. Now check out how lack of sleep affects your attractiveness. Or click this other video instead.